to the Future Privacy Coin panel. So I'd like to give my two panelists an opportunity to give a little bit spend about a minute describing your background and your interest in the area.
My background is I have a PhD in mathematical sciences from Clemson University. I got into Monero a couple years ago. I needed to pay rent, and Fluffy Pony helped me pay rent in exchange for some math, which is different than how that usually goes.
My name is Poelstra. I dropped out of a PhD in mathematical sciences. I helped develop a few technologies such as confidential transactions and scriptless scripts that are used in privacy coins such as Monero.
Cool. So Andrew, this one's to you. How do you think Peter Woollah's Taproot and Schnorr Bitcoin improvement draft proposal will impact the privacy of Bitcoin?
Sure. So the question is about a new proposal that was published to the Bitcoin development mailing list a couple days ago for a technology called Taproot, which is something that Peter and myself and Greg Maxwell and Johnson Lau and AJ Towns and a long list of people have been working on for a bit over a year now. And what this does is it lets you hide Bitcoin scripts inside of public keys. And the motivation for this is a realization that a few of us had a few years ago that in common applications of Bitcoin script, such as the claim or refund construction that Brandon was talking about in his talk, typically you have a number of parties who are interested in making sure that coins move depending on some conditions of some contract that they're executing amongst themselves. And if everybody agrees that those conditions are met, they can just go ahead and sign to move the coins. We have this blockchain scripting language called Bitcoin script that's designed to enforce all of these crazy conditions. But ultimately, if everybody who cares about where the coins are going agrees that they should move, they can just sign off on that. So what Taproot does is it lets you replace your Bitcoin script with just a public key, a single public key that perhaps multiple people have jointly contributed to and multiple people are needed to sign for. And the idea is that in the cooperative case, even if you have many parties doing something very complicated off-chain, they can just produce a signature with this key. In the non-cooperative case, when you actually need the blockchain to mediate things, to say, hey, after a certain amount of time has expired, then there's an alternate key that might spend this, or maybe somebody has to reveal the pre-image to a hash or something, then you can reveal a script with those conditions. And you can prove that your original public key committed to that script. So you're not just making up a script after the fact. And this is the magic of Taproot, is that in the cooperative case, you never reveal the script. Nobody knows there was any script involved. But in the non-cooperative case, it's still there on the blockchain. It's still committed to, and you only reveal it when you need it. So the consequence for privacy is that as long as people are doing complicated things, such as atomic swaps or the Lightning Network or whatever, as long as they're doing so cooperatively, the resulting transactions they make will be indistinguishable from ordinary single signer transactions like you or I use with our Bitcoin wallets.
Cool. This next question is for either of you. Peter Todd spoke earlier about the Zcash Trusted Setup MPC. What are your thoughts on his talk and Zcash in general?
You want to start?
I mean, I've been talking for several minutes.
Yeah, OK. My thoughts on Zcash are complicated. I do firmly believe that the folks who are working at Zcash are trying to make the world better, and they're trying to remove trusted third parties from finance. I don't agree with the idea of becoming a trusted third party in order to remove trusted third parties from finance, but that's their design philosophy and engineering philosophy. I look forward to what comes out of the Zcash team regularly, but I personally have a real hard time with trusted setups. One of the things that we like at Monero is to avoid trusted setups, specifically to avoid what Peter was talking about, which has to do with, in the end, you're still trusting Peter Todd to have driven across Canada instead of just staging photos with really pretty backdrops. And of course, Peter might be a trustworthy guy, but are all of the participants trustworthy? I'm not so sure. And some of the ways that the Zcash team has handled certain disclosures recently, like the deleted transcript, these things weird me out, and I have very complicated feelings about it, because the math behind Zcash is really cool. I feel like the corporate structure might be a little weird.
Cool. I'd like to second those misgivings about trusted setups in general. And I'm excited by a lot of research, including stuff being done by people at the Zcash Foundation, which, to be clear, is distinct from the Zcash Corporation, who I also second Brandon's concerns about their ethical and incentive structure. There are a few specific points on Peter's talk that I want to talk about. So I agreed with all of his concerns, pretty much, that these are all like real difficult things. The thing is that it's hard to fix most of what he described. So one thing that jumped out at me was the fact that he needed to find somewhere with cell phone access and network access when he was doing the trusted setup. That's unfortunate. It would be nice if he could have done it in the woods or in the mountains with no network connection. But it's difficult in a trusted setup. You typically have several stages of interaction. And in order to do that, it basically would have required that he drive back and forth between self-service and not having it. So he tried to simulate that by doing computations inside of a tinfoil box, which is cool. But that's pretty much the best you can do, and that's unfortunate. And then the second thing he talked about that jumped out at me was his discussion on deterministic software builds. And that's something that, as an ecosystem, we are slowly getting better at. But it is slow, and we're not yet at a point where it is what it needs to be. And this is something that I hope, and I'm glad that Peter's talking about it, and I hope that people realize is a very serious issue, that we need to have determinism in our software builds, especially for something like cryptocurrency, where we have cryptographic software and compromised software can very easily, with a few bytes of change, steal everybody's money.
Cool. So what are your thoughts on zero-knowledge proofs, and what are some of the use cases?
I'm sorry. I heard an echo. I didn't catch the...
What are your thoughts on zero-knowledge proofs, and what are some of the use cases?
Zero-knowledge proofs are the word synergy from 1992 transported several decades into the future, right? It's like you have the business guys who are like, oh, we'll just wrap it up in a zero-knowledge proof. Zero knowledge is an interesting thing because, I mean, look, black holes leak information about the contents inside of them. So the thought that like the Zcash snark system or Monero's zero knowledge ring signatures can truly be zero knowledge, that's all under certain very theoretical assumptions that like you're in a closed system and that there's no metadata being leaked or anything along those lines. But as soon as metadata is available, you can link stuff together. And I have bad news for everybody in the audience. The Monero blockchain is metadata about the Zcash blockchain, and the Zcash blockchain is metadata about the Monero blockchain. I can use information from the Zcash blockchain to try to start linking Monero addresses and vice versa. Anytime you have two anonymized data sets that you bring them together, they're not necessarily anonymous anymore. And so the idea that you can wrap like an auditing statement up in a zero-knowledge proof without revealing anything about the contents, I think that's a very theoretical concept in cryptography and pure mathematics and information science that does not translate to the real world very well.
I'm going to ignore everything you just said and accept all the assumptions that you said are unrealistic and give a very technical answer, assuming we can work in this idealized mathematical model. So as Brandon said, zero-knowledge proofs are kind of a buzzword. They're very hot right now. They've been around since the 90s. In some form, they've been around since the 80s. A zero-knowledge proof is just a mathematical object that somehow demonstrates that some statement is true without revealing anything except that that statement is true. And for specific examples of zero-knowledge proofs, we've had these forever, like the ring signatures that Monero uses. These are actually zero-knowledge proofs that some particular key image you attach to a transaction corresponds to some specific key. And the idea is that if you try to spend the same coin twice, you'll have to use the same key image twice. And so the zero-knowledge property hides which key is involved, but it eliminates the risk that somebody will use the same key twice, despite nobody seeing what the key is. But when people talk about zero-knowledge proofs today, like in the last year or so, they're typically referring to very general zero-knowledge proofs. Zero-knowledge proofs not about some specific statement that was specifically chosen to achieve some goal at a minimum of efficiency and computational cost, but general zero-knowledge proofs where you have some arbitrary program that you might describe in some arbitrary way. You want to be able to execute the program, prove that it accepted, meaning it returned true or it didn't abort or whatever your accept condition is. This is something like a Bitcoin script where accepting means the coins are allowed to be spent. And you produce a zero-knowledge proof that this program accepted, but with no information about what auxiliary data you gave to the program to make it accept, or even in some cases what the program is. And there has been a lot of very exciting work in this line. So zero-knowledge proofs general zero-knowledge proofs as an idea have been around since the early 90s, late 80s, but for them to be practical wasn't really a thing until a 2013 paper, Snarks for C, that was released. And this was a zero-knowledge proof for a computational model called TinyRAM, a simple subset of the C programming language that would let you generate these zero-knowledge proofs that were very inefficient. They were slow to generate, slow to verify. They had a trusted setup, all these terrible things, but they were tractable. And so we got from intractable to inefficient in 2013. And that's when a lot of the excitement developed. And since then, we've seen leaps and bounds, improvements, both on representing programs to make them more efficient to use as general zero-knowledge schemes, and also to make the zero-knowledge schemes more efficient themselves. And then finally, there's been an exciting development in replacing the trusted setup that was endemic to basically any efficient zero-knowledge proof with something that doesn't have a trusted setup. And there are a few exciting lines of research along those lines, stuff like Starks by Elie Ben Sasson and others. So I'm excited to see all of that development moving forward, and that has very broadly applicable potential.
Cool. So why is the ability to obscure data so important?
There is an echo, and I can't hear
Could you
every
repeat
question.
that?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's a bit of a feedback up here. It's not terrible. So why is the ability to obscure data so important?
Do you want to start this?
Sure. So why is the ability to obscure data so important? So when we talk about obscuring data in a blockchain context, we are talking about not publishing that data permanently to the entire world in an irrevocable manner. So let me rephrase that question as, why is it important not to publish all of your data to the entire world in an irrevocable manner? And when worded that way, maybe the answer is intuitive, but let me explicitly state that. If you are a business trying to do financial technology or financial transactions, you cannot reveal your order books and your internal accounting to the entire world. If you're an ordinary person trying to transact economically, you cannot be revealing everything that you're buying, everything that you're spending to the entire world. You don't want to reveal to your landlord what your income is or when you get a raise. You don't want to reveal to your parents-in-law that you're buying birth control. You don't want to reveal to your church that you're donating to the Democratic Party. You don't want to reveal to, and in some cases there are much more serious consequences. In some parts of the world, you don't want to reveal to your government that you're doing certain things. Otherwise, you are at risk of quite serious physical oppression. And so when we develop privacy technologies for cryptocurrencies, we aren't necessarily trying to hide data and obscure and live in holes and prevent anybody seeing what we're doing. What we're trying to do is prevent everybody seeing what we're doing. And that's necessary to have a free society.
I absolutely agree with everything Andrew just said.
That's good.
I think something that people forget a lot is that the history of cryptography is steeped in wartime stuff. Back in World War II, World War I, being able to pass messages secretly is how those wars were fought in a lot of ways. They were fought with bullets too, but the history behind cryptography is the history of an arms race. And for all the reasons that Andrew just mentioned, if we aren't constantly battling against the forces that want to unmask us all for everything, like Facebook, because they want to be able to sell you advertisements that are perfectly targeted for just your psychology, not just your demographic, but your psychology. You're actually engaged in a form of warfare. It's an information warfare. But people really tend to forget that cryptography is not really a game, and people's lives are on the line. And when you have people in Venezuela who are experiencing 10,000% inflation daily, and they need to be able to pay rent, or they need to be able to buy food for their family, and if they go out to purchase Bitcoin in some sort of transparent way, they're putting themselves in danger. When you have situations like that, their lives on the line. And so, yeah, I absolutely agree with everything Andrew just said.
So what are some of the downsides of hiding data?
Well, I guess I'll start. Facebook can't target advertisements for your specific psychology. We all really like the trade-off between security and convenience, right? All of us, I mean, some of us might be using password vaults on our phone, which seem a little bit inconvenient, but at least you don't have to memorize 75 different passwords and change them regularly. And then there's the people who aren't using password vaults, which are sacrificing all of their security by simply appending digits to the end of the same password that they've been using since 1992. And so when you start talking about the downsides of obscuring data, there's the downside of convenience. There is a part of me, it's a dirty part of me, but there's a dirty part of me that wants Facebook to advertise directly to me. I want that. Because they know I like bonsai, man. Like, I want them to send me bonsai plant advertisements, like, directly. But if I do that, then I sacrifice all of my ability to act as a private individual. So there's a trade-off.
So I'll start by describing something that's not a downside, but that often people in the financial industry and regulators are concerned is a downside. And this is the idea that if we had information privacy, if people and businesses were able to transact privately, they would be unable, and here I'm talking mostly about large financial institutions, they would be unable to meet the reporting or auditing requirements that they are required to have. And you have something like the 2008 housing crisis, where there are these tremendously complicated derivative contracts that nobody had read, except we're replacing nobody had read with nobody can read, and then like it's in principle impossible to stop such things. And the thing is that privacy technology does not have that downside. We are not making it impossible to have audit trails and to meet reporting requirements and to prove to people that a contract actually does what they expect it to. What we're doing is giving the ability to the ability to control the exposure of data. So we're no longer like blindly publishing it in the case of blockchains to the world. In the case of like credit card transactions to your credit card company and to advertisers and to merchants and so forth. We're giving the ability to ensure that that information goes to the people who need it for the reasons that they need it, and only the information that they need. And as a second side effect, a lot of this research into zero-knowledge proofs, general zero-knowledge proofs, involves describing programs in a way that can be understood by zero-knowledge proof systems, which, not coincidentally, is also a way that's necessary to do verifying, formal analysis and verification of computer programs. So if you have a contract, and suppose this is like something like a smart contract, which somehow uses computer code to encode the details of some financial derivative or something, you can run that code through some sort of analysis system and actually prove to yourself that it will not have certain adverse effects. And in general, that's extremely difficult to do for an arbitrary program. But with the kind of programs, or the kind of ways that we have to structure programs to work with zero-knowledge proofs, we wind up making that a lot more tractable. So a side effect of this research is to make that situation a whole lot better as well. So we're improving privacy while also improving people's assurance that information is flowing in the ways that they expect them to in order to have a free and transparent society.
Cool.
There is one other big downside to obfuscated data that has nothing to do with what Andrew just said. And this is sort of our right to know what other people know about us, right? I don't know. I mean, unless I file a Freedom of Information request, I'm not going to necessarily know what the NSA has on me. And maybe they have nothing. I hope they have nothing. But we should also be able to know what other people know about us, and we should be able to provide consent over our data being handed out to other people. And if all of the data is obscured on the corporate end and everything is transparent on the consumer end, there's a big asymmetry there that can drag everybody down.
Well, when you send a Freedom of Information Act request to NSA or somewhere, they do a tremendous lot of manual work, sifting through their trillions of documents, trying to find stuff that's relevant to you, but that doesn't have national security concerns, according to whatever definition they use for that. And the reason that you have to file an FOIA request instead of this happening automatically is that they are unable to do that for every possible request somebody might make. So we can hope that with the advent of zero-knowledge proof technologies and the verifiable computing technologies that I mentioned, that this maybe will become a practical problem. And at that point, we can be pushing for legislation such that NSA is not allowed to be storing all of this data and not revealing what they're storing to the wider public.
It's a great observation.
Cool. So Brandon, this one's for you. Can you explain Monero's Kryptonite proof-of-work hash algorithm and ring signatures, how they're specifically different from Bitcoin's SHA-256 hashing algorithm?
The ring signatures don't have much to do with the Kryptonite hash function that we use for proof-of-work in Monero. The Kryptonite hash actually, you know, the history behind Monero is totally creepy. We forked Monero from BitMonero, which was based on the CryptoNote protocol, which uses a Kryptonite hash function, which was a homebrewed hash function by whoever wrote the CryptoNote protocol. My understanding of CryptoNote is roughly it does AES encryption, and then it sort of XORs the result, and then it encrypts it again and XORs the result, and it's sort of a Merkle-Domgard sort of deal. But the whole point behind CryptoNite was to try to take up as much of the L3 cache in the computer as possible, because that's a good slow part of the memory system, so that ASIC computers couldn't really start doing the mining on Kryptonite unless they have a really huge memory capacity. Of course, that was in pursuit of ASIC resistance, and as we all know, well, actually, you know, maybe not everybody in this room knows that. About a year ago, we changed our proof-of-work algorithm a little bit. We tweaked it, and we saw an 80% drop in our hash rate because hidden ASICs were already mining on the Monero network. And I believe that we made another change since then, and we saw roughly about another 80% drop. And there was only about a 6-month delay. And so the ASIC manufacturers were able to completely make up for their losses within 6 months. Depending on who you speak with, they can roll ASICs out within 30 days. So Kryptonite is a weird little homebrewed animal that I am very eager to get away from.
While you're airing your dirty laundry, do you want to talk about the original CryptoNote implementation and its delay loops and stuff?
The original CryptoNote implementation had like all of the comments stripped out of it on purpose. There was like 130,000 lines of code. How about you go ahead?
So, deep in Monero's history, Monero was a fork of a cryptocurrency called Bytecoin, which was a privacy coin that developed this ring signature technology that Monero uses. It didn't have confidential transactions back then. It didn't have the new efficient ring signatures, or twice as efficient ring signatures as it did now. But this was the first this was the first demonstration of this ring signature technology for obscuring which outputs were used. And it's very interesting that there was some genuine technical innovation here, because Bytecoin was in every other respect a transparent scam. It was released with a white paper with a forged timestamp on it, claiming that it was 2 years older than it was. It included this strange new mining algorithm that I guess involved AES or Ketak or something. Yeah. It claimed to use SHA-3, but actually it used a pre-standardization alternate version of SHA-3 that nobody else had implemented. So it's very frustrating to work with Monero, although now people have written libraries. But this new mining algorithm they used, which they claimed was like ASIC resistant and had all these great benefits, had some reference code, which was very difficult to read. It was loops within loops within loops. It was not clear what the control flow was. It had go-to statements in it. There were no comments. I think there were like 3 comments in the entire code base. They were in Russian. They were not helpful. And what was found was, after people started looking at this, after Bytecoin became a little bit more popular, after it was revealed like the backdated white paper and other aspects of this scam, it was discovered that you could strip out a whole lot of these loops. And it was possible to mine Monero like 100 times faster, even without ASICs or anything. And so there's not really any hard evidence of what was going on here. The original people behind this, the pseudonymous people who published this paper, who developed this technology, nobody knows who they are. But it would appear that they had deliberately designed this scheme so that they could privately mine Bytecoin much faster than the general public who was using their published software could. And Monero was started, I believe, as like a rebellion against this. Monero took the Bytecoin code base, said like, "Whoa, guys, like we're gonna drop all of your weird secret mob scams, like whatever's going on here. We don't want any part of it. We're going to start our own coin with a clear genesis and without all of this."
Bytecoin even had like 2 years of fake blockchain. They just simulated a fake blockchain, and they were like, "It's been in existence for 2 years. People have been using it on the darknet markets forever. It's worth something."
Yep.
And I believe that our key image exploit from about a year and a half ago, I believe it was a year and a half ago anyway, the Bytecoin people, there were 69 billion Bytecoin minted from this key image exploit, which is only like $1 million at the time. And then if you look at the price of Bytecoin before and after, it's just like, it's like a neuron spike. It went up, and then it went back to where it was. I'm like, scarcity has nothing to do with the value of this coin. It is completely being run by the market, by people manipulating the market. Bytecoin's history is the stuff of movies. I can't wait for the first movies to be like speculative fiction movies about who actually invented Bytecoin. That's going to be more interesting than the first speculative fiction movies about Satoshi, in my mind.
I suppose this is another downside of privacy technology,
Yeah.
that this group of anonymous scammers who roped the cryptographer in, at least one cryptographer, was able to do this and continue to get away. So this happened years after everything I described. Bytecoin continued running, and then what Brandon just described happened, I guess, a year and a half ago. And that's still a thing, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's very strange. It's a very strange world that we live in, where anonymous people can develop new technology and deploy it, and then like continually use it to execute further scams without any indication of who they are or how they're doing this or where they're coming from.
Yeah, fair enough. So Andrew, this question's for you. People often look to the Lightning Network as a way to scale Bitcoin. What privacy features will the Lightning Network bring to Bitcoin?
So, I like this question. So Lightning today has, so first let me say, the way that the Lightning Network works is that you have this primitive called a payment channel, where you have two parties moving money between each other. Basically, initially they put some coins up so that they both then jointly control their coins. They use this claim or refund construction to make sure that they can get their coins back if anything goes wrong. And then they sign a transaction, sending some of the coins to the first party, some of the coins to the second party. And when they want to make payments, they sign a replacement transaction, moving a little bit more to one party versus the other party. And they just keep signing these replacement transactions over and over and over. And what the Lightning Network does is it gives a way to link these payment channels, make them atomic with each other, so that if Brandon wanted to send money to Alex, he could do so through me, or perhaps Alex and I have a payment channel between each other, Brandon and I have a payment channel between each other, but Brandon and Alex don't directly have a payment channel. And the way this is done is that, I'm going to get this backwards, but one of the two endpoints decides on some secret, hashes this up, and says to the blockchain, in order for the coins to move, you have to reveal this secret. So, and we set this up in a chain. So what will happen is when Brandon wants to pay Alex, I'll make a transaction that will send some coins to Alex that she can only take if she reveals some secret. I will turn around, and before I did this, I had set up a transaction with Brandon such that if I revealed the same secret, I could take his coin. So now as soon as my coins go to Alex, I've learned a secret that I can then pull coins from Brandon. So already there are a couple privacy benefits to this architecture versus the normal Bitcoin transacting scheme, where everybody makes transactions and publishes them to the blockchain. One is that we can do this over and over and over, and we're just replacing transactions off-chain. Okay, we aren't actually publishing anything to the network until we want to settle out and use these coins in something that's not Lightning. And the hope is that if we're all like well connected, we don't have to do that too often, because you can always find another Lightning path. And the second privacy benefit is that we are routing payments rather than doing this through the public peer-to-peer network. Brandon, who's trying to send the coins, is trying to send them to Alex. He creates a path going through me in this case, who then goes to Alex. And the exact path that these coins take is not necessarily visible to the world. Now, in practice, there are a couple limitations. One is that all of the payment channels, I believe right now, are actually published to the world to make routing more efficiently. The second thing comes from the secret that we're sharing. So Each of these transactions that happen on the way from Brandon to me to Alex have a hash, the hash of some secret data, and that's part of the transaction. When you create a transaction spending those coins, you have to reveal the preimage to the hash. And in all of these transactions, the same hash, same preimage. So when we close out, we can do it cooperatively. We can sign a transaction that doesn't have any of these things if we all agree. But if we aren't cooperative, or if we just decide not to close in that way, then we have to reveal all of these hashes and their preimages to the blockchain. And now it's very visible that we're using the Lightning Network, and that all of our distinct payment channels here are part of the same path in a specific payment. And so neither of those is so great. But there are some improvements coming along the line that will be made possible by Taproot, which is the privacy improvement that Peter Wille published a few days ago, that will make this a much better situation. The first is that Taproot itself allows this cooperative closed case to happen without revealing the underlying script. What's called an HTLC, a hash time locked something contract. So you no longer reveal on the cooperative case the hash preimage, or the hash or its preimage, which is great. So now the public can't see that all of these, the blockchain validators can't see that these are Lightning Network transactions, and they can't see that they're the hash and the preimage, and they can't see that these payments are linked. That's pretty cool, but we can still tell. So imagine Brandon was sending a much longer chain where he's sending to somebody else, and it's going through me, and it's going through Alex, and it's going through me again, and then to the next person. And maybe Brandon doesn't know that it's me twice. And he's trying to obscure the path that his payment goes, even from someone like me. And who's joined the Lightning Network, is trying to be part of a whole bunch of payment channels and trying to monitor the flow of payments in this way. I can do two things now. First of all, I know, despite any other privacy measures that Brandon has taken, that I'm the same guy in both cases. I'm the same counterparty. So I've effectively shortened his path for privacy reasons to only 3 from 5. And then secondly, I can also cut Alex out of the loop and steal her fees. And that's kind of a philosophical question whether this is really an attack, but it's certainly not what was intended. So there's another technology that is related to Taproot that allows us to eliminate both of these attack vectors, both the fact that there's the same preimage that I can see, and also my ability to shortcut people out of the path. And this is something called adaptive signatures. And I'm not going to go too deeply into the mathematics of these. I'm going to try not to go into the math at all, actually. The idea is here that each of these payment channels are between 2 people, so say between me and Brandon. In order for us to spend the coins, we have to create a multi-signature. And in the Taproot case, we have to interactively jointly produce a signature on our shared key. Because remember, in Taproot, we've got 1 key, not 2, even though there are 2 people. It is possible for me to encrypt a secret to my contribution to the multi-signature in a way such that when I later actually do contribute to the multi-signature, Brandon will then be able to decrypt the secret. So what I do is I encrypt the secret. I give that to Brandon. Brandon says, great, I will now sign to give you your coins. And he knows that as soon as I take Brandon's contribution, add my own, and publish to the blockchain to move the coins, I will have revealed the secret to him, because he can see the signature on the blockchain. He can subtract out my contribution from it. He can subtract out my contribution from his encrypted version, and he learns the secret. And so we can replace this hash and hash preimage business with these so-called adaptive signatures, where now the actual signatures on the blockchain are now doing the job of passing the hash preimage around. So it's not only that we're hiding the hash and the preimage behind this Taproot branch, it doesn't even exist anymore. It's part of the cooperative case. It's part of the single signature case. So now we can link payment channels in this way, where we're revealing a secret and passing it along between the parties who individually are signing. We can do one better. Because of the algebra underlying the secret construction, the way it differs from being a hash preimage, we can actually do what's called a reblinding of the secret. So now when I receive the secret from the last person in the line, so we're still going Brandon, me, Alex, me, the audience, you all get, everybody gets a coin. Now, when I receive the secret from the audience, I reblind it and pass it to Alex. Alex learns that secret. She can now use it to take her coins. She reblinds it and passes it to me. And now, the second secret that I receive, because Alex reblinded it, no longer looks like the other secret. I can no longer tell that it's the same secret. OK? And then I reblind it, pass it to Brandon, and then that finally completes the payment. And the payment goes through. But now, because I can't see that these two instances where I'm participating in payment channels are the same thing. I no longer know that that's a single path. And my hope of mapping out all the payment flows within the Lightning Network is severely undermined, because now every time that I'm participating in a payment channel, those all look uniformly random to me and independent to me, even in the case that they're actually part of the same payment path. So once we have Taproot, and once we solve all of the engineering challenges related to deploying all of that stuff that I just described, we'll see that a lot of the promises of privacy of the Lightning Network will really come to fruition.
Cool. So how do you think exchanges would respond to, let me ask that again. How do you think exchanges would respond if Bitcoin soft forked in some ideal version of privacy technology, such as confidential transactions, that didn't run the risk of silent inflation and where the transaction sizes in bytes remain small?
So the phrase confidential transactions when it comes to Bitcoin is very different than in Monero with ring confidential transactions. Confidential transactions, or at least confidential assets, they have to do with masking transaction amounts. And in certain senses, also the asset that's being traded, if you were going to do colors or something along those lines. But the addresses at either end of the transactions are still Bitcoin addresses. And so they're still going to be stored on the blockchain just like usual. And so maybe you should start, and I'll just go off of you.
OK. So Brandon, as a developer of an altcoin, has perhaps a different relationship to exchanges than I do at Blockstream as a developer of a sidechain. So let me put on my marketing hat and describe a little bit about what Liquid is, how it relates to confidentiality, and how it relates to exchanges and confidentiality. So the confidential transactions that Brandon is talking about is this ability to replace all of the amounts in a transaction with what are called Pedersen commitments, these cryptographic commitments that somehow bind the amount while hiding exactly what it is, while still allowing people to add the commitments together and check that different sums are equal. Okay? And the upshot of all of that is that nobody can see what the amounts are, but given a transaction, they can add up the input amounts, they can add up the output amounts, and check that those two things are equal, even though the things they're comparing are these like cryptographically blinded, random-looking objects. As long as they're equal, the amounts are equal, so the transaction balanced. And this technology was originally developed by Greg Maxwell at Blockstream for a project that we've been working on for a few years called Liquid. And Liquid is a sidechain of Bitcoin. So this is actually our privacy blockchain. It's called Liquid. Unlike an altcoin, while this is an independent blockchain, it does not have its own token associated to it. The primary token that you use on Liquid is actually just a proxied Bitcoin, a Bitcoin that is pegged at a one-to-one rate by a cryptographic peg that I don't have time to go into. So people move Bitcoins onto Liquid. They can then move Bitcoins back. And when coins are in the Liquid network, they are custodied by some consortium of many different exchanges. We actually have 15. I believe not all of the 15 are exchanges, but the majority are exchanges who have joint custody of all of the coins on the network. And in order to move the coins back to Bitcoin, you need 11 of those 15 to sign off on that Bitcoin transaction. And while the coins are on Liquid, you have access to confidential transactions. You have access to a more general thing called confidential assets, where people can issue their own tokens and have those share privacy sets with Bitcoin and so forth. And when we developed this in 2014, 2015, our fear was we were very excited about confidential transactions. Like this was suddenly it went from being like kind of a boring financial technology application to here's how we really can improve the privacy story in the Bitcoin ecosystem is by providing this technology to people so they can proxy their Bitcoins through something private. We were very worried at the response that exchanges are going to give us. We thought they're going to be like, whoa, like this Bitcoin stuff is already this weird like criminal internet anarchist money, and you're making it even more criminal internet anarchisty. So like, can you make the internet or the anarchism or something go away? But what we actually found when we started pitching this to people is that real participants in the financial industry and in the Bitcoin exchange space, in the cryptocurrency exchange space, got very excited about this. They said, wow, this is amazing. Now we can solve the real privacy problems that we're having with people front-running our transactions. with people seeing the way that we're transferring money between the different exchanges, is undermining our ability to function as exchanges because we cannot move liquidity without revealing that we're doing so and thereby revealing our internal accounting. And this is a way that we no longer have those limitations. So my experience as a technology provider for exchanges is that they are very excited about this privacy technology. But perhaps your experience as an altcoin provider.
So here's something that most people, and I think KYC exchanges are aware of this. I'm not sure if regulators are aware of this, but the vast majority of the time when you're talking about Monero transactions or Zcash transactions or Bitcoin transactions, people buy some Bitcoin or some Monero from an exchange, and then they go to a vendor and they purchase an item, and then that vendor immediately goes back to the same exchange and cashes it out for dollars. And so if you end up doing that and you go end-to-end KYC to KYC, especially if it's the same exchange, the exchange has all of the information necessary, even if you're using Monero, even if you're using Zcash, in order to de-anonymize you. And so the KYC exchanges are looking at their entire internal system with perfect vision, and it's looking outside of their own systems that they have a difficult time with. Convincing regulators that the KYC exchanges already have all of the information that they need in order to comply with things like the Bank Secrecy Act or Know Your Customer laws. This has actually been my challenge, has not been dealing with the exchanges, but speaking with people in the regulatory space, because it seems to me that a lot of people in the regulatory space want to be able to see past one hop in a private sequence of cryptocurrency transactions. But if I withdrew money from Wells Fargo and sent it somewhere else with a wire transfer, they may know which bank it went to, but what happens beyond that, they have no way of knowing, and it's unreasonable to ask Wells Fargo to make a suspicious activity report based on where that money went, depending on certain factors. On the other hand, with cryptocurrencies, they seem to want to be able to see beyond one hop. For example, I've heard rumors about certain cryptocurrencies wanting to do these view keys that go past a single hop, so that if you hand over the view key to somebody, then they can see far enough into the future. And yeah, I think that the exchanges are excited about the privacy, and the actual users are excited about the privacy, and then regulators just kind of don't know what I don't want to say that regulators don't know what they're doing, so I won't.
So I think we have time for probably one more question, and it's kind of a big one. What is Wimble, and what are some of the projects incorporating the protocol?
What is Wimble?
I describe Wimble to people. This is the guy to ask. I describe it as a math teacher, as a former math teacher, it's a sequence of telescoping sums. So you add 1 and subtract 1, and then you add 1 and subtract 1, and you keep doing that, and then all the interior additions and subtractions, they each cancel out, and in the end, it's just here to here, right? And it telescopes in. That's how I visualize Wimble. It's a sequence of Schnorr signatures, but all the ones that are in the interior, if you add them all up, they all just disappear anyway. At least that's how I visualize it. How about you?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I can add a little bit, I can add a little extra detail to that. So Wimble is confidential transactions in its purest form. You take a confidential transaction chain, such as Liquid or Monero or Grin or Beam or whatever's out there. I think a bunch of other things have it now. And you remove all the scripting, you remove all the ring signatures, you remove all of this extra stuff. And now you say that rather than having these blinded commitments to your amounts just represent a hidden amount, we say, how about we take that blinding data and we say now that blinding data is going to pretend to be a secret key in a complicated definition of pretend that works in practice, although it is difficult to describe and has difficult philosophical consequences. For example, I could own 2 coins in Wimble without owning either one of them individually. And I'm sure I've been trying to come up with a really contrived sort of legal dispute based on this, because I would love to bring that to court, but I can't. I'm sure there's something. And because confidential transaction commitments can be added and subtracted, if you have a transaction where I'm sending coins to Brandon and then he later sends those to Alex, my transaction will have the coins appearing on the positive side of some verification equation. When Brandon sends them, they'll be on the negative side of some verification equation. So we can add our two transactions together, and you get exactly this telescoping thing that Brandon described. So in Wimble, you do that for the whole blockchain. And that's Wimble.
Cool.
Does that include verification? Like from scratch? Like if I started mining tomorrow and I download the whole blockchain and it's time to sync up, can I literally just add up all the transactions in the blockchain and call it good?
Almost. Okay. So you don't have to do the addition. Actually, verifiers will do the addition for you. And so you need to learn all of the coins that have been unspent, because every spent coin will have been canceled out in the past. You also need something called a kernel associated to every transaction. And this is just a single public key and a single signature that is used to assure verifiers that transactions were not like created to cancel out and then but they never really existed. And this is to evade the loss of information that happens when you cancel out entire transactions, essentially. So there is actually this one object that stays behind, this 100-byte kernel that is there. And you do need to download and check the signatures on every one of those.
Cool.
Awesome. All right, I think we're at time. Thank you for joining me on the...
Great.
Thank you so much for moderating, Alex.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.